that when people constantly push the narrative of individuals needing to use renewable energy sources, using less plastic, right? We think that these things are good to push onto individuals, but we regret this narrative because it doesn't bear any fruit in combating the real environmental problems, right? At the end of the day, what are the real environmental problems? Like air pollution in China, which is from the corporations in the very first place, right? Second piece of setup. Instead, we want to wholesale support corporations' environmental responsibility. What do we mean by corporations' environmental responsibility, right? This means it looks like telling companies to switch to a much more renewable energy source, or even telling them to just stop polluting at certain areas. We have to concede, most likely these corporations won't listen. But we tell you that at least we're shifting the blame to these corporations. And why is it better to shift the blame to these corporations? Is because more often than not, these corporations produce the most pollution on a wider scale instead of individual responsibility, which combats on a much smaller scale. So what is our burden? We just have to prove why individual responsibility is ineffective and why it is worse to have this narrative. And the burden the opposition has to prove in order for them to win this debate is they have to defend a world where they don't bring change for environmental issues and corporations continue to pollute without having the blame on set stuff, right? But before that, any POIs, before I move on to my first argument about corporate responsibility. No POIs? 3, 2, 1. So first argumentation on corporate responsibility. So the premise of this whole argument is that corporate activities affect environment the most, right? That's to say, like corporate activities like mass production through factories and the production of non-friendly environmental products affect environments in a much horrible way. That's to say, like pollutions are like 80% of pollutions can be associated to only 20% of the population. We see this in countries like India and China, who are responsible for more than half of the total emissions of the rest of the world, right? So why should other countries have to cover for them? Why should they have to sacrifice for something that they didn't cause? And what does this sacrifice look like, right? Like having to pay for extra plastic bag or having to replace plastic straws for metal ones, right? We don't think that can actually combat what these other countries have done, right? We don't think it can pay up to what these countries have caused in environmental disasters, right? And when we have this narrative, corporations can easily shift the blame onto individuals and they can escape their responsibility. And by not holding corporations and nations responsible, they will continue to damage the environment. That's to say, they may think that there are no consequences onto their action and they have to escape. And they have the scapegoat, which is the people, to take the blame for what they did, right? And therefore, the problems will not be solved. What is the impact to this? So corporations can take responsibility for their actions instead of shifting the blame on individuals. And this also, the next impact is it can also open up retaliation by the people. That's to say, when we put the spotlight on companies, governments will give incentive in form of subsidiaries instead of and also like adding the demand of people, right? Government are more likely to adhere to changes in their manufacturing means. However, if we push the responsibility to people, at first they will adhere. That's meaning when they see like the rivers are still polluted, the index is still increasing, right? We don't think that if we push the responsibility to people, that more change will happen because of those reasons I told you, right? And this is when they realize their sacrifices are not working because of all these pollutions. And added with the fact of how long they've had to sacrifice to the changes, they're more likely to retaliate and try to make things worse if we put the blame on the corporations. And the comparative here is, in our world, corporations can be more responsible as they will be held accountable for their actions. However, in opposition's world, corporations can easily damage the environment and then shift the blame on individuals, even though they're massively more responsible. But before I move on to my second argumentation on ineffectiveness, do you have any POIs?
When you talk about corporations damaging the environment, you must also acknowledge that people, individuals are the one funding the corporations. You change the people, you change the corporations. That is without a doubt a fact.
Sure, individual responsibility is the prerequisite to corporations changing their narrative, right? But we say that we think that the narrative of shifting the blame to individuals is ineffective because at the end of the day, these individuals are blamed for things. However, corporations still continue to pollute, still continue to do immoral things like to our environment, like polluting through rivers. And we say that the effective way is to shift the blame onto the corporations. So the second argument, ineffectiveness. Now, the whole premise of this argument is that the solutions done by individuals are not enough to counter the emissions done by manufacturing corporations. That's to say, they will only be slowing down the harms from materializing. And even if people were to start taking initiative, right, people can only do so much to reduce themselves from polluting the environment. And they're unable to undo or cleaning the messes of corporations. And this problem can only be solved when we pay attention to the steps taken by these countries and pressure them into submission. And opposition will try to argue that companies won't listen, but opposition won't be able to mitigate this crisis. They're just prolonging it because individual responsibility isn't bringing a big impact, right? And people won't have like enough money or resources to get more sustainable products. So at the end of the day, they will have to limit as to how they can help the environment. And the impact to this is that instead of focusing on individuals' efforts to combat the environment, problems can be more focused on more important cause, which is the corporations and the giant nations. Now, the conclusion to this whole thing that I've already set out is that we can get corporate responsibility because we're shifting the blame onto these corporations to be accountable for their actions. And secondly, about how individuals' responsibility is extremely effective at the end of the day. And with that, I'm extremely proud to propose.
Thank you. Deputy Leader, Leader of Opposition. Here.
Excuse me, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, I think both sides will have to concede, well, it is a known fact that corporations are the ones who do most of the damage, and we don't think that this is a mutual exclusiveness on their side or on our side. Just a few fatal flaws that I can see from side of the government in their case setup that we don't see the case working out for them in any way. The first thing that we've seen is they're telling us to shift the responsibilities to these corporations who are doing the damage in the first place. We do agree that, okay, this sounds like a good plan at face value, but number one, this is already happening. Corporations are being held accountable for the damage that they have done to the environment in the first place. We acknowledge that the carbon footsteps emitted from these large corporations are the ones blowing the holes in the ozone layers and everything. And we do agree that they are already doing this, and it's already a known fact. Secondly, even if we are to shift the blame, as you say, quote unquote, shifting the responsibilities to these large corporations, we don't see how this changes anything really on your side, because firstly, you did not give a clear example or explanation in how to shift it in such a dire or drastic way that there is a guarantee that these corporations are going to make a change in the first place, because I just said it's already happening. And secondly, yes, they're not bound to listen because people will keep buying. And as long as there are people still supporting their businesses, there are people still buying their products, nothing will change in the end game. But the second large flaw with that argument is that the danger of this is that firstly, it completely removes all hope from individuals from making a change in the first place. And secondly, it's putting us at completely the mercy of these corporations. Like, they are literally on the government side, the one who's going to change the future, and it's up to them, right? There's literally no guarantee. And even if it is, right, even if people finally start to riot or start to revolt, it's probably going to be in a world where it's already too late and these environmental changes are apparent in our own cities or something like that, right? There's no guarantee that action is going to be taken before it's too late. They gave us a burden to defend a world where nothing changes, basically. But I will raise you our arguments that in our world, of course, removing, like in your world, the absence of this narrative in the first place is going to create a far larger disadvantageous situation in your side, right? So firstly, the narrative of individual environmental responsibility. Now, we have to agree that this is a good narrative, right? It inspires you to make change. It inspires people to know that we can all play our part in battling climate change, right? So now, when we have this narrative in each of our minds, it makes a sense of it makes a sense of togetherness. It creates a sense of one, that we will all want to play our part. We will all do what we can to change in saving the world. And secondly, our point was that we blame the people because now we are all together on the front, right? We want to change the environment because we believe that we have our own parts to uphold. We are now blaming the people who are directly harming the environment. This is why I said we don't think that this is a mutually exclusive thing on their side. Even if you want to do it in such a drastic way, we haven't seen how you would want to do that in the first place, right? So firstly, a few burdens that I would put on the government side, sorry. Firstly, please explain to us how this narrative is inherently bad for the environment. Like, how does it not help the environment as opposed to be bad to people? Sure, you can claim all you want that is going to cause us a lot of stress, but in the long run, we think that this is a far advantageous situation as opposed to living in a barren wasteland, right? This narrative inspires people to stand up and make a change. Even if our own individual changes are small, it will lead to something bad because in turn, it will lead to something bigger because in turn, it will inspire people around you. So why would you want to regret such a noble narrative? Second burden that I would want to impose on you is how the absence of this narrative will uphold the momentum of the battle for climate change that is already going on, right? Because that stemmed in the first place from people having this narrative that we can make a change. You may claim that this is going to be ineffective, but we have seen large organizations and large charities actually making a difference in battling climate change. So with the absence of this narrative, how is the momentum going to keep going, and how will you keep fighting for our environment in the first place, right? So two things that we will prove to you from opposition side. Firstly, we believe that every little change matters, and this little change leads to big changes. I will explain that later in my argument. But secondly, this narrative has been fundamental in helping the battle for climate change. I'll tell you why we believe this in the first place, right? So as an average citizen, for example, we see all the damage that these corporations have been doing, and we may, at first glance, it may seem like an impossible task. It may seem difficult for us to make a change in any way, lest that these corporations make it, put it to their minds to make a change. But we believe that.
Right.
Okay, sure.
What kind of narrative that you want to put on people? Would you say that people are bad, or would you say that people should do good?
Obviously, that on the side of people who just want to see a better environment, we should do good and we should all try our best. But this is what you on the government side are trying to take away from us. You do not want this narrative, right? We already concede that these corporations are doing the most damage, and we can see that this damage is apparent. So why shouldn't we just sit down and do nothing about it, right? Climate change is inherently bad, and nobody wants that. Nobody wants a bright future. Nobody imagines a bright future and thinks of like a barren wastelands or rising temperatures or melting icebergs. And as much as they do not want this change to happen, it's the small determination inside you that changes and burns up into something stronger, right? One person can make a lot of change. We'll take Mr. Beast, for example. He has done a lot of fundamental projects that has helped the environment. And it's these little things that we see once in a while that will inspire us to also make a change. This individual responsibility doesn't just mean you have to make a change. It means it also encompasses, for example, let's say you're not littering, right? Individual littering. You see all the rubbish on these clogged beaches. That comes from us individually. And if we all make a change and all stop that, then we believe that this is going to make it will make a change in the long run, right? So imagine what this could do with the other people around you, right? Because these bigger changes leads to something a lot bigger, right? These organizations, these charities that are actually making differences, even like the ones that are planting whole forests and managing these massive scale projects like cleaning beaches, and these all contribute heavily to the battle against climate change. But remember that in the end, the fight against the climate change, no matter what the scale is, it starts from each of us, and it starts from every single individual. And we believe that this narrative is the most fundamental aspect, and we don't want this narrative to fall. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister, here.
All right, just give me a minute to set my timer. Sorry. Okay, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, side government is quite confused with what kind of a world they actually have to defend. We tell you that the world side government has to defend is a world where every individual are the only ones coping to these environmental damages, right? We tell you that they have to defend a world where they have to ignore or pay a blind eye to what these corporations are doing because they want every individual to be the ones responsible as a whole. We tell you that are the impacts of this motion, and we tell you that this is why side government is far better off. So now, I'll start with a couple of issues, and which will be integrated with my own rebuttals, and then I will move on to extend with my first speaker's arguments. So, I'll start with the hope argument, right? Because they tried to argue that even if these people get to, play play a role into this issue, we tell you that they tried to tell you that it creates a community and that these people will be more together and it creates hope. We tell you that my first speaker has already demonstrated how even if everyone were to contribute, it would be ineffective because the amount of help that they can even bring will not be enough to not only even suffice for the damages that is coming, but to overcome and eliminate it overall, right? So at the end of the day, the hope the opposition is trying to give you is only fake hope, right? We tell you that it's better for them to not have any hope at all, for them to rely on these companies changing, because that is when drastic measures can happen, instead of trying to be complacent or trying to be gullible by the fact that me using metal straws every single day is helping the benefit of the future, right? Now, they also tried to counter us by saying that even if people were to retaliate, it would already be too late, right? And we tell you that is simply not true because we can see this in status quo. There are numerous people who are complaining about having to use metal straws when you're using your metal straws to drink from your plastic cup, right? When you have plastic bags, or you order metal items that come shipped in plastic packaging. People are aware of the ineffectiveness of these changes and they don't want to have to sacrifice for these changes when they know by their own eyes that the other harms are more significant, right? Now, moving on, their whole case was about how they want to keep the momentum going, right? And we tell you, though it may be true, yes, we understand that side government will keep the efforts to mitigate pollution keep going. We tell you that it will be going in the wrong direction because, as we've mentioned, as we've seen, we have attempted to criticize or punish these companies to pressure them into change, and there has been progress. This is why we have eco-friendly cars. This is why we have filters on factories to reduce their pollutions, and we have proper testings on these companies when manufacturing. And side government cannot take this benefit because if they were to take this benefit, it stops there. There will be no further progress on their side of the world. Now, we tell you that on their side, they want to uphold momentum where more people are trying to increase their efforts in the small matters because a little bit makes a huge difference. We tell you that it's simply untrue because it is only when you tackle these big corporations who are responsible for the big damages that is when real change can materialize. Before I continue, yes, POI.
You talked about companies changing to electric cars or so on and so on. Isn't it the individuals pushing and advocating for those changes that made those companies change? Is it the individuals that did that,
Yes,
not
I
the
understand.
companies
Okay.
themselves?
Don't try to misunderstand what I'm saying. Okay, we understand that the people are the one that are pressuring change. However, in your world, you are not pressuring these companies. You are pressuring people. You're pressuring people to make small differences in their lives. If you want to pressure companies, then that means you agree that these companies are the ones that need to change. These companies are the ones that should start producing quality goods, eco-friendly goods for the people. There's a significant difference in the sides that we're trying to debate, and we hope that side government does not conflate the two into one. Now, moving on, they tried to tell you that, sorry, so now I will move on to extend with my first speaker's arguments, right? Because not only has she pointed out that it is not even the individual's responsibility to begin with, because they have no or very little contribution to how bad the world is today, and that when we give the contribution, when we give the obligation to other people, it releases the tension onto these governments, onto these high polluting countries, right, such as China, India. Because the problem is when we shift the blame to people, and yes, we are shifting the blame to the people because even side government agrees that the people are the problem. I don't understand why they would say that, but yes, when we shift the blame to the people, right, these corporations, what does that say to these corporations, right? It tells them that, oh, they don't want us to change. They want other people to change as well. So that means that these corporations will have a leeway to capitalize as much as they can because people are no longer paying attention to these corporations. Now, apart from the whole fact that these people don't have the proper obligation or the right fair obligation to sacrifice themselves for these corporations, right? She also told you how it will be ineffective as a whole. And this is the key point of this debate, right? Because both sides wants to mitigate all of these climate problems from going to the point where it is no longer fixable, right? So should I tell you that it was ineffective even if everyone were to? Yeah, sure, because it's almost time.
Give me a yes or no answer. Aren't individuals the one that work in these corporations? Aren't they the ones that are working in these corporations?
Yes. Okay. If you want to talk about it like that, right? These are factories you're talking about most probably, right? Because these are the ones that are carbon emitting the most. However, these are also low requiring jobs, right? They are not working. They don't need much background to be able to work in these corporations, and these are usually people who are in need of income. So more often than not, they don't even have a choice. They just need a source of income, and if these factories are able to give them a source of income, they have no choice but to concede. And if you okay, never mind. Further on, okay, moving on to the impacts of this ineffectiveness of our site, right? How it will be ineffective if people were to do it. Because instead of focusing on the individuals, efforts to combat environmental problems can be more focused onto corporations and giant nations. This is how we were able to produce effective change, because in comparison, right, on our world, we'll be able to better combat environmental problems more efficiently. We'll be able to tackle major causes of the problem. On opposition's world, they will only continue to fight an inevitable loss, and they will continue to ignore the bigger picture with their own false ideologies. With that, never been prouder to propose.
Sorry. Cannot press just now. Okay. Thank you, Deputy Leader of Opposition. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen on the floor, what the government team has done here is try to push you the narrative that the blame of environment being harmed should be pushed to the corporations. They say that the real monsters are these corporations. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we as the opposition have given to them that yes, corporations do a big deal to the environment, but here is where we differ. When they say that pressuring individuals to help change the environment is ineffective, we say that is the core issue. I would like to quote exactly what the leader of government, what the Prime Minister of government said when she said that individual responsibility is a prerequisite for these corporations to change. As such, following our motion, following our line on this debate, we believe that by changing these individuals, we will intend change corporations for the better. And as they have also proven to you that these corporations have changed on the basis that the protests by these individual people have made them change. Now, to answer when I POI the second, when I POI the Deputy Prime Minister asking who works in these corporations, he agreed that yes, individuals do work there, but they contended that individuals rely on these corporations. Well, three arguments to refute that claim is that NGOs exist. Second of all, they're different corporations. Whereas we said there are corporations who produce eco-friendly material and do not harm the environment as a result of individuals pressuring these corporations or building new corporations to change that rhetoric. And thirdly, there are a multitude of governments trying to support climate change. So these individuals who you say have only that corporation who is filthy and trying to pollute the environment have other places to go to. Now, moving on to more rebuttals from the Prime Minister. When she talked about wholesaling the blame to corporations and how she also mentioned companies won't listen. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to frame for you a certain topic where when you put the blame on companies, nobody is pressuring them. Companies don't take blame just by blaming them. You know who pressures companies? The consumers. When you put consumers at the front, when you show consumers that you are responsible, that's when companies will realize, hey, let's try to change to cater to our consumers more. putting the blame on companies, what it will intendedly do is the companies will just take the blame. Oh yeah, we're doing this, but we don't care because there's no real pressure, because people don't feel a sense of responsibility towards the environment. Now, in terms of how the government, a very key point in the government's case is that to say that we as opposition are going to be blaming individuals willy-nilly for whatever they do. No, we have told you that we as the government, we as opposition team, sorry, are trying to push the narrative that when you cause harm to an environment, when you have a harm to the environment, you will have to the blame from it. They brought in examples of people complaining about plastic straws, so on and so forth. I put to the government team to prove that the narrative, the individual responsibility is inherently bad for the environment, not for individuals. Are you going to say by these people, by the proof of these people trying to complain about plastic straws, plastic packaging, which in fact, hold on a minute, they have changed to biodegradable kinds, that these metal straws are bad for them? Are you saying that the comforts of human beings outweigh the benefits of an environment that future generations can benefit from? But now, moving on to my two very specific points that refute the government's claims. First of all, we're talking about people. When we accept this narrative, people, individuals will develop a love for their surroundings, for the environment. Now, why is this true? Three methods is that the surroundings, when this narrative falls, if the government's world exists, when this narrative falls, they blame big corporations. People will not have an appreciation for the environment around them. Where does this come into play? Countries like Bhutan, which is already at a zero carbon emission rate. Why is that true? The government, the individuals have all pushed for individuals to care about the environment themselves. That is a perfect world where we as opposition team support, and there is living proof of that. So, and there's no claims on the government side to refute that. I would invite them to do so. Now, secondly, when we accept this narrative, it creates a duty of care for everybody around us. It creates everybody a responsibility wholeheartedly to say, hey, I'm going to change for the better because I want to live in a proper world with prosperous, clean air for the better. Now, why is this good for an environment? Well, first of all, obviously, it creates a better environment, cleaner air, no rubbish, less pollution, when everybody pitches in to do their help. If you're trying, as what the government is trying to say, put the blame on corporations, all they can do is stop their thing. And there's no guarantee. The government has no, I invite the government to guarantee me that these corporations will listen. They themselves have said these corporations might not listen. Well, the benefit of the doubt is, in our world, people will actually listen because, ladies and gentlemen, peer pressure, people pressure is the most powerful tool. And if the government team wants to say, oh, we don't want to be burdened, then I put to them, are you really going to put the comforts of people above the environment?
UI?
Now, yes, accepted.
So are you saying that people should pressure corporations?
Yes, what is the problem with that? You yourselves have said that the prerequisite for corporations to change is for individuals to change. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what the government is trying to do is try to squirrel the motion to try and push away the fact that we are saying that this narrative is good, this narrative is inherently good. What they're trying to do is blame the corporations. Their side of the debate is trying to say that by blaming the corporations, it is better and inherently more effective. Ladies and gentlemen, by putting people at the front, by blaming people, what this inherently does is it changes people for the better. Examples were given by my first speaker, Mr. Beast, who did Team 3s, Team Cs, they cleaned up everything. Why is this true? Well, first of all, that individual effort, that one person making the effort inspired others. And what that happens from that? There is complete change. And how can the government team say this is ineffective when they're living proof that this works? Greta Thunberg is another one and a good example of this. Now, furthermore, we talk about fairness. When we put blame on everybody and not just specific corporations, when everybody has a sense and a chunk of responsibility to take care of the environment, everybody has a sense of fairness, and there's nobody that can put blame on very few people. Everybody holds a blame. And when that happens, people can be held accountable. And when people can be held accountable, change can happen. Pressure can ensue. And when that pressure builds up, people will change. Everybody has to change, and the environment will inherently get better. That is why we as the opposition team strongly believe that this narrative is the best narrative for helping the environment, as well as we are proud to oppose what the government is trying to do to this narrative, which is to make it fall. Thank you.
Thank you. To conclude substantive material, I welcome Gov Whip. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Right, just give me a sec. Right, just one last check. Am I audible?
Yes.
All right, cool. All right. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, I think that what we heard from DLO is basically he's trying to say that it is true that we need corporations to change or help the environment. We need corporations because only the corporations is able to do such like initiative to help and solve the environment, right? But even if they were to say that, oh, we can only change it through the people, and they said that this is the right case, fine, we'll still argue on that premise. But secondly, right, I like how Diallo is trying to convince us is saying a bit. Sorry, I like how Diallo is trying to claim that when we shift the blame or the narrative to people, people will say like, "Oh, I do care about the environment. Let's clean up all like rivers and whatnot because suddenly we care about environment." Firstly, I tell you that this is untrue. Why? Because understand that we don't put accountability or responsibility to people who actually pollute, right? When you see people with plastic straws and whatnot, you don't go find these people. There's no any form of accountability towards the people. So we don't see or understand why people would suddenly care about the environment just because you shift the blame, especially when there's no form of accountability or like there's no form of accountability towards these people, right? But secondly, I like how they also trying to prove to us that people work in factories, therefore them buying these products is the effect of the change in demand and how like company have to like produce plastics because it's the demand. And I like how they're trying to prove to us that people should rationalize with company. Firstly, if I tell you that companies right now are using fossil fuels, you won't be shocked. Why? Because you rationalize to the idea that companies have to use these fossil fuels or things that actually pollute the environment in the first place, right? The reason why we say that it's important for us to change the narrative towards the company is because that people don't understand or people think that it's not possible for company to shift to a more greener and like more environmental friendly products and whatnot and sources, right? So we say that this is why it's important because we need to like open a more we need to like open up a more detailed story as to why company use this, and we need to properly understand why they need to use this because and whatnot. And we tell you that only when we shift the blame to the company, we can like also change the demand of the people. And this is something that I'll deal with in my speech. So panel, two issues that I'll be dealing with. The first one is on which is better, right? Whether we should blame we should change the narrative to corporates or individual. First, I'm going to tell you why it's such a good thing that we should blame the corporations or companies, right? Because first, when we shift the blame to companies and companies actually want to take initiative to change the environment, why is this so? Because if the company actually so if the company choose to like pollute the environment and whatnot, we tell you that there are fines, there are charges to put these companies in accountability. But secondly, we also have like a global global legislation or understanding or agreement. For instance, like the Paris Agreement, right? Where like each company need to reduce their usage of fossil fuel by 50%. We tell you that company are like in status quo right now, we put company into accountability, which means that there are initiatives for government to help them to improve and become a better company, especially when we also give them initiative such as giving them subsidies to using more green and to use more green technologies and whatnot. But secondly, we tell you that it creates transparency. What does this mean? We tell that companies, they usually align with medias, right? Which means when we start to shift the blame on companies, medias will approach every company and tell them, why don't you move to this? Why don't you use more greener technology? Which means now company actually have to be more front forward to people and saying that, oh, we want to use this, but the thing is the demand won't change. And I'll tell you later why demand is so hard to change on that side of the house, right? But basically, they try to explain to the people that this is why we cannot do this because people won't buy our paper bag. In status quo right now, we can already see that there are a lot of companies producing paper bags, but at the end of the day, people still prefer to use plastic bags because it is much more cheaper, right? It is much more cheaper not only for the people to buy, but it is also much more cheaper for companies to produce themselves. And we think that this idea of transparency will create better changes, which, I'll explain it. But lastly, right, we tell that demand can only change if corporates are ready, which means that when society actually learn that, oh, okay, we like corporates cannot change to a more like friendly environment products is because of us. We tell that only then people will actually slowly and starting to do this, right? To actually like force the like companies or like try to increase the demand of a more greener like products and whatnot, like the DLO try to uphold into this debate. But let's take a look what
Yeah,
are the harms. No, thank you. Let's take a look at the harms of individual, right? So I'm going to prove to you why like pushing the narrative to people is such a bad thing. First, like I explained earlier, there's no accountability. Like if people choose to like smoke, if people choose to use plastic straws and whatnot, we don't charge them, we don't fine them. There's no form of accountability. I don't see why people will actually suddenly change, especially when the idea of opportunity cost, where people actually have to choose what are the products that they're buying in order for them to save money, because the idea of like lacks of sources or lacks of money exists much more among the people. I don't understand why people would suddenly care about environment, because they need to prioritize themselves, right? We think that this is something that the side opposition never truly mitigate. But secondly, we tell you that they try to give us examples like, oh, we have NGOs that are cleaning up beaches and charity works. We tell you that this is not effective because it is only on small scale level, right? But that's the first thing.
yeah.
Second, they give examples on Mr. Beast. They say that Mr. Beast do good. Okay, I feel like okay, but we also have companies that do charity works to clean environment. We also have companies that move to solar panels to give them electricity. So what's your point here, right? But let's say you still want to argue that Mr. Beast and NGO is still doing such a good thing. We tell that this company, when companies actually change their initiative, it is much more better. Before I move on, yeah.
When you talked about how companies doing it is better and you gave the analogy that Mr. Beast better, you have to understand companies are restrained to the company. Mr. Beast had the world on his side, 7 billion people. How is that less effective?
Panel, if all 7 billion listen to Mr. Beast, then wouldn't we solve climate change by now? We said that this is like, I don't understand the point of them giving Mr. Beast into this debate. It doesn't make sense, right? But lastly, what they will think, what's the point of them cleaning up beaches if at the end of the day companies pollute the air? If at the end of the day companies like take down trees and whatnot, we say that this doesn't make sense. But lastly, it's on how people, they lack of resources, they don't have enough money to change, they need to prioritize themselves. But company, because they are held responsible, because medias are always on the back of these companies, because everything that the company, every time the company do something wrong, medias will actually rush into this company and tell them, why are you so evil? We tell you that this is much more effective, right? So aside from accountability, we tell you that we have a lot of incentives to give to companies to on reasons why they need to change to a more greener products and whatnot. But lastly, we tell you that we help to companies help to like improve the environment on larger scales. Panel, I think it's important to know that demand is only possible if companies are transparent with people, and we say that society are only like we can only allow company to become transparent once we shift the blame and once we tell people that you cleaning up beaches and whatnot is not effective, because at the end of the day, companies is just going to like erase your whole idea. So yeah, with that being said, go with side government. Thank you.
Thank you. To close substantive portion of this debate, I welcome Opwip. Here.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
All right. So I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The burden of proof that the opposition has given to the government is to prove that this narrative will, in the end, give bad effects to the environment and not the people, like has been stated by my Prime Minister. And also, on our side of the opposition, we are trying to prove that these narratives are very good to the environment, as per the arguments that have been brought by the side of opposition. And this side of government has never proven that this narrative of individual responsibility on the environment would lead to a bad environment in the end. So, ladies and gentlemen, the first clash in our debate, whether we should put the responsibility on each individual or just on a certain corporation. Ladies and gentlemen, the government side has stated by themselves that corporations are doing the most bad in this world, the most pollution in this world. So that is why we need each individual to have a sense of responsibility to take actions against this corporation, so that everyone will everyone will blame this corporation, and everyone will blame this corporation, and in the end this corporation will cater to what their customer needed. So ladies and gentlemen, why are we regretting this narrative in the first place if this narrative are going to let more people contributes to the environment, rather than just having a certain corporation contribute to the environment? Ladies and gentlemen, uh, you say yourself that the government say themselves that the corporation doesn't listen when we put the blame on themselves. Ladies and gentlemen, that's why we need to put a blame on each individuals that cause a that does something that cause a pollution, each individual in this corporation, I mean, so that when each person receives the blame, they'll feel more pressured, they'll feel more burdened, so that they will withdraw from causing more pollutions towards the environment. So with that being said, every single individual in the company, every single individual in the corporation contributes to the environment, which means that this narrative stands, so that even if the government can shift the blame from individuals to blaming the corporation, they wouldn't even achieve the burden of proof that the opposition side has asked them to prove in the first place. Now, for the second clash, whether or not this narrative is effective to improve the environment is the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, the solution that has been brought by the government side is to put the blame on the corporation, and to take actions on the corporation that does a pollution. But ladies and gentlemen, these solutions could only work with the narrative that each individual is responsible for the environment. Ladies and gentlemen, like they said just now, these people, each individual can report any corporation that cause pollutions to the environment. So how are we gonna get these people to give back response to this company? Is to is to is by having each of them have a sense of responsibility towards saving this environment, so that each of them will give back response to this corporation in the first place. So ladies and gentlemen, next is, how do we build a corporation? My DLO and my LO has stated that to build a corporation, you each person needs to have a sense of responsibility, so that one people could lead to more people, and that more people will give bigger impacts to the environment in the first place. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the government side has likes to talk about the plastic straw usage. So I will talk about the plastic straw usage. So imagine a certain corporation versus every individual in this world, billions of people in this world. If every single person in this world use a metal straw, versus only a certain people, only a certain corporation use a plastic straw, which one would give more benefits to the country in the end? Of course, billions of people. Even if each of their actions would only contribute to small change in the environment, these small actions, when we accumulate them, it will lead to bigger impact, and in the end give a very good impacts to the society. Ladies and gentlemen, the government side also talk about how these people would eventually come back to the usage of plastic bags and plastic straws if we don't shift the blame to the if we don't shift the blame to the corporation. But ladies and gentlemen, by having each individual felt love and responsibility towards the environment, how are they even gonna come back to something that they know will in the end cause pollution and harms to the environment in the first place? So this clearly shows that their arguments about the ineffectiveness of the narrative towards the environment, and how they could shift the blame to the corporation, false, even if they manage to achieve the benefits that they want. Now, third clash is whether we should put the burden on people, or we should focus on the environmental safety in the first place. Ladies and gentlemen, blaming one person, or only a certain person on individual that creates a pollution is better than affecting the whole community by having a pollution in the first place. In the long term, in the short term, by putting the blame or the burden on the corporation, this might lead to the people feeling safe or not feel pressured by the burdens and all from this responsibility. But in the long term, this world will experience no change because each individuals in the end not even care about the environment, because they each of them doesn't even think they have to contribute to the environment, because they think that, oh, there are corporations already doing this work for me, so I don't have to contribute anything or doing anything for the environment. So that's why in the long term this will lead to a better environment, instead of just having a certain corporation works for this. Next is, we shouldn't put the comforts of people over the responsibility to take care of our environment, because action of one person doing anything that will cause pollution will affect the whole world, the whole community, and not just the person themselves. So that's why we believe that this narrative is good. With that, I rest my case. Proud to oppose.
Thank you. To kickstart the reply speeches, I welcome op reply. Here.
Excuse me, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just all take a step back and just look at the motion and how we were supposed to handle it in the first place, right? I think it was supposed to be a pretty simple motion. Government side was supposed to tell us why they regret this narrative, and we were supposed to say the opposite, why this narrative is good, right? It was very simple, actually. All government side has to do was, in the most basic form, is one, tell us why this narrative is bad, and two, we added on, I put the burden on that the absence of this narrative will still help the battle against climate change. Not only did they not do that, they also tried to offer a so-called solution that they claim will only happen on their side, and that the solution has guarantee of even happening in the first place, right? What we had to do was, I put the burden on our side that we would prove to you why all these small things, all these small changes matter, and how this leads to the big change in the first place, because we argued to you that our arguments were centered around the fact that this individual environmental responsibility is what leads to the collective sense of responsibility that each individual has to go to, each individual will make a change. That's what leads to all of these companies, all these NGOs making all these big changes in the first place, right? Secondly, we've told you that this narrative has been fundamental in helping the battle for climate change, the thing that both sides, I think, want to support, right? Or so that's what it seemed, right? A government side also put a burden on us, where we had to defend a world where nothing changes, because putting shifting these blames on the people, which also something government side has somehow made this debate to be, is because of the fact that it's ineffective, that nothing changes in our world. But we already proved to you why that is not the case, right? I think it all also centers around the fact that they didn't even have to give a solution, right? All that they had to do was to prove to us why it's bad and why this narrative is harmful. Okay, they told us that first, the corporate are the ones to blame, but we've already told you that we agree with that fact, right? That shouldn't be an argument, because that is a fact. These corporates are the ones that are doing the most damage. Secondly, they told us that all these small things that these individuals are doing are ineffective, because we can't make up for the damage that these big corporations have done, right? And thirdly, they've also told us that people have no obligation to make a change, because it's the corporation that are doing these things. But we've already told you that if people have no obligation, then what is it that's going to make the change in the first place, right? Okay, let's look at the clash. Somehow the government has made it to pressuring people versus pressuring corporates. Okay, firstly, I will tackle. We had tackled the pressuring people part. We've already told you why this was not the case, because even if in our world where this narrative stands, firstly, these people acknowledge that it's not them doing the damage. It is these corporates. These individuals who want to change the world are not the ones at fault. But secondly, they acknowledge that it's the corporations that are doing these things. So how is it that when this noble narrative stands, where everyone wants to make a change, it's somehow putting the blame on the people, as if somehow they were at fault that the environment has changed to the way it was, right? they also tried to push onto us that this sense of responsibility is stressful and it's not their obligation. But we've already told you that it's this sense of obligation in the first place that's going to lead to the change. They've told us that pressuring corporates somehow is the best solution to go deal with this thing, right? Okay, firstly, as I already stated in my speech, we could not find a guarantee that this will work, but even we'll take them at their best, right? They talk to us about transparency, about how these corporate will change, right? But what is it that makes the change? In the absence of this narrative, the people do not care. They will keep supporting these corporates no matter what they do, and no change will be there will be no changes in the end. And they also told us how the people have no obligation. If that is the case, then this will also apply to the people in the corporations themselves. And we've told you that if they have no obligations, then how is it that the corporations are supposed to change, right? If there is no narrative, then there is no solution. Their solution actually works better on our side, because with this solution, somehow it actually helps, right? Because all these people working to dethrone these corporations, making them change, will only work if they have that sense of individual responsibility in the first place. And with that, I rest my case. Thank you.
Thank you. To close the debate, Gov reply. Here.
Thank you. Okay. Wait, sorry. Just forgot to set my timer again. Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair, the main concern in this debate is who should be responsible for what, right? And now both sides have agreed fully that the main problem is because of these corporations. So what is this debate about, right? Now they tried to argue that we were trying to provide a solution. Now we understand it may be perceived that way, but I'll make it clearer this way, right? We are saying that it is wrong for you to support this narrative because it strays away from putting pressure onto these corporations, right? When you give individuals some sense of responsibility for this environment, it shifts the focus away from these corporations. And we've also mentioned why this is important, because there have already been progress in these corporations in the form of subsidies, in the forms of tax exempts. And this is also why they would be encouraged to adhere to these regulations, because they have the economic benefit to do so. Now, so apart from the fact that they completely failed to understand our stance in this debate, right? They also somehow agreed with us from the second speaker and into half of the third speaker, right? Because they were trying to say that we need people to pressure the corporations. And this was specifically asked and specifically answered by the second speaker. And which is ironic, because that is our whole case. That is what government is trying to say. We are saying that we want to pressure these corporations by means of these people, because there is no other way to pressure these corporations. What side government was supposed to do, which was very clearly stated in their first speaker, I don't know why they changed direction, but in their first speaker, which was how they have to defend the side where they are taking their own initiative to replace their own everyday items with renewable items, to clean up the beaches on their own accord. And this was mentioned by my third speaker, and I've also talked about this in my own speech. So regardless of all of that, right? Regardless of the fact that they can't even be consistent with their own case, they can't be consistent with what exactly they want people to do, fine. We'll argue also, we'll explain also how exactly it will be ineffective, which is usually the biggest clash in this debate, right? Which side is more effective in cleaning up or in resolving this issue, right? So they try to argue that 7 billion people is far more effective compared to having certain corporations adhere to these regulations, right? And we've clearly told you why that is not true, because it is because of even just 2 countries that they are contributing to more than half of the population's carbon emissions. We tell you that it's completely unfeasible. One, it's unfeasible, and also 2, because if it were to be like that, as mentioned by my third speaker, they would have solved this problem a long time ago. So effectively, we've mentioned that on-site government, they're only giving you the illusion of help, only the illusion of a proper, better future, right? We tell you that they are only prolonging the pain and they are not resolving the issue at all, and they are conceding to not being able to resolve this issue. Whereas on our side, we give them a better chance of resolving this issue, and we also tell you that it's likely to happen, although not guaranteed. We tell you that even if certain corporations were to adhere, it would make a much more significant difference than anything opposition could do. And thus, that is why we are able to mitigate this issue, and that is why it is because of this narrative that this issue will never be resolved. And with that, you should side with side government. Never been prouder to propose.
Okay, thank you everyone. Please wait here, cross floors, virtually shake hands if you want to, and wait for the results, and then we'll talk about the debate. Thank you everyone for the great debate.
All right, thank you.